birthing experience at the Malden Hospital, he said. But to Fanicos and to many other obstetricians who spoke out against the growing use of nurse midwives, shunning hospital technologies and procedures was not only unnecessary, it was dangerous. Ventre's disapproval of moving babies to the protective nursery during visiting hours, for example, evidences callous disregard of the infant's well-being. Fanicos's true rage, however, was directed at Ventre's espousal of home births. Local history is replete, he writes, with home birth disasters of recent and distant occurrence. To advocate a return to home deliveries is evidence of a total disregard for the present and future well-being of the infant and mother involved, he snapped. He referred to such practice as a kind of barnyard obstetrics that was totally irresponsible. Then came the threat that Ventre, with her limited nurse midwifery training, should believe that she is going to bring any fountain of new knowledge to the local situation, may be ego-satisfying, he quipped, but delusional. Clearly, Ventre would have no future there. Instead, she became the first director of the North Shore Birth Center at Beverly Hospital, which was the first freestanding midwife-run birth center owned by a hospital in the country. Located on the grounds of the hospital in a small gray building, the birth center represented a new trend in childbirth options. Birth centers, initially at least, carried the potential for transforming what had become a sanitized and medicalized event. Flowers, wallpapers, rocking chairs, and beds that turned into delivery tables allowed women to feel more at home during their labor, while still having access to medical technology and obstetrical backup. Many of these birth centers were affiliated with a hospital and in the vicinity, which made emergency transfer more efficient. Peggy Vinson, a California-based midwife, opted to become director of the first alternative birth center in the East Bay, housed at Alta Bates Hospital, where she had worked as an obstetrical nurse. She describes the transformation of part of the hospital as workers gutted a postpartum room and, in her words, trucked in a queen-size bed, fold-out couches, brass lamps, and enough potted plants to rival a rainforest. Soon the room resembled an upscale southwestern motel. As the director, she initially moved through hospital protocols with little resistance from the practicing physicians. She began to realize that the doctors did not understand what was about to hit them. They estimated that perhaps 6 to 8 women would sign up in the first month. Instead, 40 showed up at the first meeting. She recalled doctors being a little confused by the whole birth center concept, while the nurses basked in our newfound power. We volunteered extra hours of work for the satisfaction of choreographing very special births for women who hope to experience the births of their babies as potentially transforming events. Vinson's optimism, though tangible at that moment, would not last long. In 1980, after 3 years as director, she left the center and began a practice in home births. Ventre began her tenure at the North Shore Birth Center in 1980. Under her direction, the staff of nurse midwives grew from 2 to 3, and the number of births rose from 125 babies the first year to 225 for the next 3 years. Its status as the region's only birth center drew national attention as it was touted as a model center. As with many birth centers, the cesarean rate was far lower than it was in neighboring hospitals, and the cost was significantly less. Perhaps Ventre began to believe that she had been sent to Massachusetts for a reason. Beneath the surface, however, all was not well. Though the birth center ostensibly operated separately from Beverly Hospital, in reality, hospital standards increasingly encroached upon Ventre's terrain. As Dr. Fanicos at Malden Hospital had dismissed her ideals as barnyard obstetrics, so too did obstetricians at Beverly. Problems began whenever a midwife accompanied an emergency case from the birth center to the hospital. They were frequently met with resistance, and in one case, doctors forbid Ventre to accompany her client into the hospital's labor unit. In June of 1984, the hospital introduced a new protocol that required midwives to consult with an obstetrician if a woman had been pushing for more than 2 hours, a situation which frequently resulted, not surprisingly, in the obstetrician demanding a transfer to the hospital. Harvard Business School professor Regina Hertzlinger characterizes the tensions between North Shore Birthing Center and Beverly Hospital as one of management style. As she explains, the hospital's managers were uncomfortable with the full implications of customer mastery. On the one hand, the nurse midwives were uncomfortable with the traditional hierarchical model of hospital management, in which one person supervises others and strict protocols guide organizational relationships. Ventra desired independence and the freedom to respond to a laboring woman's needs. And that sort of, as I'm saying this, it reminds me that's the exact point of tension in the earlier debate 100 years before about clinical versus subjective versus objective analysis. Ventra desired independence and the freedom to respond to a woman's needs. She considered the center to be essentially an adaptation of home birth, while the hospital's managers and obstetricians viewed the center as an extension of the hospital. In December of 1984, the hospital's budget director complained that the midwives had difficulty accommodating to institutional policies, such as merit evaluations and other hospital protocols. Ventra responded that these standards were appropriate for a hospital, not a birth center, and that she was being judged solely on management, not midwifery. She resigned the following morning. Ventra was shattered with the outcome. What happened to me demonstrates the precarious place of the unorthodox practitioner within the system, she reflected later. They kept me as long as I was useful, and then circuitously found a way to coerce my resignation. In retrospect, she believed it was impossible to reach an accommodation with these physicians because they were bent on exerting control and reinforcing the medical model. The North Shore Birth Center, potentially a compromise or meeting point between these two models of childbirth, could not sustain the ideals promoted by women's health activists. Leaving aside the personal loss I suffered, claimed Ventra, the greatest casualty was the professional trust, sharing, and interdependence built up among the midwives of Beverly. It was like a Camelot for midwives and families. And she said that again to me on the telephone when I interviewed. She talked a lot about Camelot. It was not long before a growing cynicism became apparent among health activists and natural childbirth advocates. Sociologist Wendy Simons notes, "You can domesticate the surroundings by hanging floral wallpaper and providing padded rocking chairs, but redecorating will not alter conventional power dynamics as long as the precepts of obstetrical monitoring remain in place and the operating room is right down the hall from the labor and delivery room suites. Though the new birth centers may have been a positive experience for some laboring mothers, it did not represent the transformation of childbirth that activists such as Ventra had hoped for." On November 18, 2008, a coalition of midwives and mothers congregated on the lawn of the North Shore Birth Center, protesting a Board of Trustees meeting underway. At stake was the future of the birth center, owned by Northeast Health System, a company that planned to close the center and move all births back over to Beverly Hospital. Hospital officials explained why the decision was financially necessary. As with other birth centers around the nation, they explained, North Shore Birth Center is experiencing a significant rise in the cost of malpractice insurance premiums. But protesters demanded that the board reconsider its decision. Carrying signs that read, "Please don't take away our choice," mothers shared passionate birth stories in an emotional setting. Though the numbers of babies born at North Shore were significantly reduced from Fran Ventra's days, some 80 to 90 babies enter the world within its walls annually. Picketers were not the only ones who decried the hospital's decision. Our Bodies Ourselves co-author Judy Norsegian helped to draft a letter to the Board of Trustees, urging them to reconsider their decision and instead, in her words, open a dialogue with community members and women's health advocates who are deeply concerned about the critical importance of this reproductive choice. Rebecca Haynes, an assistant professor of communication at Salem State College, started a Facebook group, Save the North Shore Birth Center, to exchange information and share personal stories about the births at the center. Within 2 weeks, 839 people had joined the group.